Hello, my name's Lewis, and you're listening to Kakou Talk, a podcast about accessibility and community brought to you by Kakou Technologies. You're currently listening to episode 6 with our guest, Adrian Williamson. I hope you enjoy. Hello everybody, welcome to the 6th episode of Kakou Talk. I'm sitting here with a very long-time friend of Kakou and Fomukong-Boden, Adrian Williamson. How are you?
Yeah, hi, thank you very much. I'm good.
So, as always, I think the most important thing we can do right away is for you to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, brilliant. My name's Adrian Williamson. I'm the Innovation Support Project Manager for Chesterfield Borough Council. What that basically means, it's the longest job title ever, but what it basically means is I provide business support for businesses, which means I talk to them on a very regular basis. That's my job. And my job really is to highlight the things that would potentially be worthwhile them thinking about. I don't tell people what to do. What I do is I talk about the potential options they've got in terms of quite a lot of variety of different things. I deal with all sorts of sizes of business, micro ones from individual people right up to businesses up to 250 people across all the different sectors really. In some respects, my job is kind of like a sort of problem-solving job. But part of it also is fun because I'm dealing with so many different people across so many different sectors.
Sure.
My role in this very much so is to make sure I ring fence everything as well, because obviously if I spoke to everybody about what somebody was telling me that was intimate about their business, that would be a problem. They wouldn't be able to trust me.
Yeah, there's got to be a level of confidentiality in what you do.
Yeah.
Not crossing wires.
No. I think the thing that's really positive from my point of view is that all the businesses that I deal with, even if I'm dealing with businesses in the same sector, and this does happen, they're all different because the culture that they have and the way they think about things is dictated by the people who run them. So even reasonably large businesses, the way that they run culturally, even though they have to run with a management structure, it's still dictated by the way that business was set up to start off with.
Oh, of course, yeah.
But that's great because it means when I go and see somebody, it's not like a carbon copy of somebody else. And then their requirements will be slightly different because they think about the world slightly differently. So
I imagine with the larger businesses, you go there and it must feel like an entirely different ecosystem. It must be like stepping into like a different terrarium every time.
It is different. But the thing is, whenever I go and see somebody, I never quite know what it's going to be like.
Yeah.
I work on the principle that everybody has a fundamental reason they want to have a chat with me. And my role really is to try and find out a little bit more about that, quite a lot more about them, what makes them tick, and then start thinking about how they do what they do, what makes it happen.
Yeah.
Sometimes some people haven't thought a lot about what they're doing. They know it's successful and they'd like to do more, but they haven't really perhaps analysed it a lot. That's not everybody by a stretch of the imagination, but there are people who are like that. And you think, well, actually, talking to me is quite useful because I then sort of help them think about the kind of structure of things they're doing. Yeah. Why does this work? Why does it not work?
So you mentioned there, you every time you go somewhere new, you never really know what to expect.
No.
So after doing this job for, the time you've been doing it, have you learned to completely let go of all preconceptions, or do you think there's still like some safe bets? Like there's still little parts of the job where you're a bit like, I kind of know what I'm getting into here. I've abandoned that.
I think the thing is, sometimes people come to me with a specific requirement. So sometimes they'll get, not with a specific requirement, but the reason they want to talk to me is a specific thing.
Yeah.
So they might want funding, or they might think, one of the terms that somebody used with me relatively recently I quite like is they feel they're plateauing and they can't get beyond kind of a certain point. Yeah. And it would be nice for them to do that, but they don't quite know how because often people are very close to what they're doing. It's almost like they're so close to it in person they can't see the bigger picture. So that sometimes dictates a little bit about what I expect about them. But one of the things I've learned to do, which is sort of counterintuitive, is I don't tend to look at people's websites much.
Oh, yeah.
And the main reason for that is that websites aren't necessarily a full rendition of what the business is.
Yes.
Now, it might be a version of what the business was, say, 2 years ago, or it's also sometimes a rendition of what people who have been told to do the website think the business is.
Yeah, it's all marketing. It's all to a degree, like kind of find like a good facing outward to the world. It's to be appealing. It's not necessarily what the business is.
Yes, and I think that I feel that to a certain extent that can lead the witness. It's not that I don't think websites are useful, and I certainly talk about websites, but I'm very much aware that if I look at a website, sometimes that can make me have certain expectations about the way the business is. Certainly even things like who the target market is.
Yeah.
And that's potentially a problem. If you just tend to assume your target market is a business to consumer, a B2C market, and it turns out they've got a sizable amount of business to business, well, actually, if you just concentrate on the business to consumer, you're not trying to absorb the wider thing. So I like to find out from people and sort of ask them the direct questions: well, who are your customers? That kind of thing, and how, and where does most of your business come from? All that kind of stuff, because that gives me an idea. Even if I'm not going to loads of detail to start off with, I've got like a shape.
Yeah, of course. You need to get down to like the core of like, what do you actually want to achieve? Like, what are you looking for? What have you been looking for?
Yeah,
I think that's a good idea to like, not like you said, not entirely forget websites and kind of online presences.
Yeah, it's important.
Let take a back seat, because you cannot get the judgment, especially on the level of someone who is going in like very intimately working with the people who
absolutely
founded it, made policies, things like that.
Yes.
It's there's absolutely no way you can compare it, I imagine.
No, and the thing is, there's a difference sometimes internally compared to the way people want to be seen externally anyway, even though it may have drifted, as we're already saying. So from my point of view, when I first go in to see people, I might be armed with the fact that I know they inquired about, I know they were plateauing, or they wanted to, they feel that they could be a bit more organised, or whatever it happens to be. But I'm very much aware that from my perspective, I need to ask a lot more questions more widely.
Yes.
Because sometimes what manifests as they think is the problem in one particular area might not actually be a problem. It's actually something that's emanating from somewhere else.
Okay.
It's again, it's to do with sometimes people are very intimate. It's so close to something, it's very difficult to see the bigger picture. A lot of the time, I provide. The way I work is I just say, well, give people ideas about things that might be beneficial to them, and then let them see whether it's something they want to integrate into their business ideas. The main reason for this is the key is so that people make decisions about what they want to do based on the way they feel it will work effectively for them. So it doesn't matter how good an idea is, if they don't feel that it would be something that would be appropriate for their business, or it wouldn't be a good fit with the way they culturally, for example, feel about the way they operate, then that won't work for them. So for me, I think the importance I have is about giving them different things that they could consider, different ways of doing things, different sort of concepts to work with, not theoretical, but sort of practical things. What could you do and how would it work? And that's one of the things that's important to me. It's not all about theory. I mean, a very small amount of it's about theory for me. It's about what makes things work. Why do businesses work? What's worked in the past, not necessarily just in your sector, but in other places. I don't share people's special ideas about doing things either. But there is a lot of advantages to working across sectors, because certain sectors work in certain ways. And so you talk to somebody else and you think, well, actually, you could operate in a similar way to the way this sector generally operates. This might be something.
It's almost like getting an understanding of a wide variety of structures.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. But there's a lot of similarities between businesses, really. There's lots, whether they're larger ones or smaller ones. They all have the things about how do they market, who are their customers, what's their risk associated with their customer base, how much does it cost them in their materials, what about their suppliers, how do they market, how do they position themselves, even though they can do a lot of things, but how do they want people to relate to them, their clients to relate to them? If it's different client groups, how do they do that? All those kind of things are very, very similar across different types of business. The scale is very different, yes, and the way it fully manifests itself is different.
So obviously, without going into, just a question I want to ask, without going into details, and obviously not going into names for the sake of confidentiality, what have you found to be one of the more surprising or unexpected parallels you've seen between sectors?
I think that's quite difficult, because I don't, even though the sectors in terms of what they're delivering are very different, the people that sit behind them are still people, and the way they think about the way the business runs is kind of. I understand what you're saying. I think, but I've never found anything very surprising from that point of view. I think the things that I've found which are surprising is sometimes I'll see people and, like you say, they just do something. They do something, but they're not really aware of why it's as successful as it is. Okay. And then it's almost like you have to help them to kind of get more detail and understand the detail of what it is, which then it helps them go forward, because then if you really understand where the levers are, it's like doing something without having the levers locked away. Yeah. But then if all of a sudden you go like, oh, actually, no, here are the levers. Yeah. These are things that potentially you can play with. These are things that can make a difference. Then at that point, they can start perhaps moving forward again. But the thing from my point of view as well is that What I do works most successfully when I'm working with people who want to talk to me.
Yeah.
I can't make people work with me, if you see what I mean. They need to kind of be receptive.
Yeah, of course.
But I've worked with a number of people for ages, really. I mean, I've worked with some people from around 2015, 2016. So I've been working with the same businesses for quite some time.
Yeah.
So I suppose that emphasises something else we haven't said, is that my job is really to develop an ongoing relationship. It's not like a one-hit wonder. I don't go and see somebody and then that's it.
Yeah.
I'm interested in exploring a little bit about the business, trying to give them some value added associated with the meeting that I have with them. And then when I come back to see them, it's about, well, what's changed since we last spoke?
Yeah.
What have you learned from then? Are there any of the things that we talked about that you've integrated into your thinking? Have you tried this? Have you tried that?
Yeah.
That's really positive.
That's interesting. We were talking about confidentiality just then, but it seems like the doctor metaphor might be really accurate then. Going back, repeat checkups,
Yes.
where have the improvements come
Yes.
from? Has anything gotten worse? How can we address that?
Yes.
Something you said that I thought was really interesting, and I guess I never really thought about, obviously I don't do what you do, so everything you say are things I haven't really thought about. But the idea that, like, sometimes when you go to help people with the things that they're not sure what to do next, a lot of the not a benefit, but something that you can use to help them is identifying what went well, like exactly why did the good things happen, to address things that like maybe aren't happening.
Yes.
I think that's interesting.
Yes. Sometimes it's asking people, what does good look like?
Yeah.
What does good look like? Well, sometimes people have never defined that.
Yeah.
And also sometimes when it's difficult to go forward, sometimes it's thinking about what's the worst possible outcome, what would be the wrong way of doing it. Well, if you know the wrong way of doing it, then you know it's in the opposite direction of that. There's all sorts of different ways of kind of approaching the issue. A lot of it depends, though, very much on the person you're talking to.
Yeah.
The way I work really is I work with people. And there might be larger businesses or smaller businesses, but the success I have is really working with people, trying to help them kind of just move forward that little bit. And invariably where I'm working with businesses for an extended period of time, these small increments, they all add up. It's a bit like, I always think it's a bit like compound growth. That's what you've got, a little increment. You pull them all together, that gives people an opportunity to improve things. And I always think I sort of sit metaphorically on the same side as the table as them. If they do well, it's not because I've spoken to them a bit, it's more because they've been successful, they've done something. But the other thing is that aside from just saying, it might be worthwhile thinking about this, have you thought about that, have you considered thinking about this area differently? Some of it is also the fact that if I sit down in a meeting with somebody, all of a sudden they talk to me strategically. They're talking to you about the business, and I always think it's a bit like it's like a frame in a comic book where people say things about their business, and they can see the speech bubble in front of them. And they go, "Oh, I'm saying this. This is my business," but they won't necessarily have had that conversation.
Of course. Well, I think that's it's the same with literature and the same with speaking out loud. Is once it's verbalized and you're actually like, once it's out of your head and it's like in the world as like a written down step-by-step idea.
Yes.
It's a lot easier for people to kind of like see like the mistakes, the advantages.
Yes, I agree with you completely. I think when an idea is in your head, it's a bit like children playing a playground that's got the ground is covered in cotton wool.
Yeah.
And it's the idea is there, and you go, "This is great. This is great. This is great." As soon as you get it out in the real world, you look at it critically and go, "Well, would this really work?
Yeah, exactly.
Where are the pitfalls?"
Yeah.
But I think from my point, the other thing I tend to find is that when I'm working with people, I'm generally quite, I suppose, an optimistic kind of person, and I suppose I'm also a problem solver type person at heart.
I was about to say earlier on, you strike me as like a real problem solver, mediator type of guy, the way you're talking about this. Someone who's like a people person, they need to work with you. You're all about just kind of almost like just rewording what they've said to make them see you're on the same side of the table as them.
Kinda, yeah.
That's interesting. Would you say you're a people person?
I think so, yeah. I think the thing is I'm a people person, but I'm also kind of quite analytical. And from that point of view, I think it means that if I gather information from people, if I'm talking to people, there are chances that I can find things, I can see things that might be worthwhile considering. So what people give me is what they probably feel are relatively bland information about the way that their business is, often because I'm seeing it fresh as opposed to seeing it something that's always there every day, which is what the people have. I can often see things in that are potentially worthwhile looking at. So if you've got the opposite, so for example, if you were operating, say, at, 75% of your capacity to generate business and you were quite comfortable, but really you wanted to generate more revenue, but you hadn't necessarily done a lot with your digital footprint.
Yeah.
Well, from my point of view, that would be, well, okay, well, could there be a way that developing a digital footprint, or perhaps making yourself more visible in a local area might be important. It might be, is networking worthwhile doing? Would it be worthwhile doing a little bit of networking? Because that's a shortcut to building visibility, all that kind of stuff. So it's to do with all aspects of business, really. I'm a sort of, I kind of cover lots of areas, but I'm not a specific expert in any one area.
Sure.
So, for example, if you wanted a solicitor, I can't do that. If you want an accountant, I can't do that. I'm not a marketeer, but I know a lot about marketing. I know a lot about a lot of things that can help people build a little bit more comfort and move forward with their business in a way that makes them moving forward comfortably, rather than thinking that, oh no, we're having to change everything. No.
Yeah. It's almost, it's less about, you're not someone who's there to like suggest colossal restructuring. You're someone that's there to, and you've said it yourself, it's like, where are the levers? Where is the good? What does bad look like?
Yeah.
It's almost like you're there just to organise thoughts. It's like you're someone who understands, in a broad sense, the kind of ins and outs and the machinations of like working in a business at a higher level. And you're someone who is able to give a second opinion, and you're someone who is able to sort of reorganise ideas, take the little parts together, just say, just look at them. What else could it be?
Yes.
I think it's interesting that that's kind of the attitude you have with it.
Yeah.
So it's not about colossal change, because if if it's a business that's functioning, it's functioning.
Yeah. I think the thing is, if somebody did need big change because everything, that there were major problems with it, then I'm quite capable of being able to do it. It's just that I think the nature of the businesses that I tend to get have contact with invariably are ones where they're doing quite a lot of things well. Sometimes they're not doing all of things well, and that's where they potentially are, like, they're having a problem. In other words, the turnover isn't as much as they want to be. Well, okay, let's have a look at what you are doing well. Let's have a look at the way that you're handling things. What does that mean? What can we discern from that? And then gathering more information, and then trying to work out where there potentially might be a problem. There is no real answer. I often say this, there's no golden orb of wonderfulness that you hand to business and go, well, you do it like this. All your problems will be over.
There's no way to win.
No, there isn't. The other thing is that the nature of success is something that's dictated not just by the business, it's dictated by the market of the business. Yeah. And that sometimes is affected by culture, sometimes affected by international finance. Sometimes there's all sorts of reasons things change.
Yeah, of course.
So it's a moving target. It's all a moving target all the time.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons sometimes where, say, for example, somebody does they have a marketing plan. They have a particular idea about what they want to do, and they do this particular marketing plan, and it doesn't yield all they want. Yeah. Well, it doesn't mean that if you ran that same marketing plan in, 12 months' time, 24 months' time, it wouldn't be successful. It might not be, but it's the idea that the world changes.
Yeah,
what people want changes. And the other thing, of course, is the nature of the businesses I deal with is something varies quite a lot. So you've got people who are working in the knowledge economy. You've got people who are manufacturing. You've got people who work in hospitality. You've got people who are working in retail. You've got people, there's all sorts of different people working in all sorts of different areas. And the way they relate to their markets is always slightly different. Yeah. But I must admit, because I've been doing it for quite some time now, I don't get fazed quite so much by any type of business. Because I've realised the most important thing is have a good conversation with people. Yeah. Find out what their problems are. Try to see if you can fix what they perceive to be their problems, and try and offer them some more that might be helpful to them. And then they might want to talk to you again. I always say to people, if you think that I'm not adding any value, I'm not helping you when we're having a chat, then that's okay. Just tell me, I'll puddle off. It doesn't matter. I mean, from my perspective, it's more about if people can see that I'm working to help them, and I'm genuinely in the moment with them, trying to do that. Yeah. One of the things about this job, especially if you do it properly, is you really do give a lot into the meetings that you have with people. You're in it with the person. You're trying to do as much as you can. So it is. My meetings last. I don't know. I suppose the shortest meeting lasts about an hour. The longest meeting I've ever had lasted about 5 hours, which was enormously long. But I mean, normally, often into the period of about 2 hours or 2.5 hours, and yet it's quite a lot of concentrated effort. It might be a conversation, but all the time I'm trying to identify things that might be worthwhile thinking about. And this is one of the reasons why when I go back to speak to people, we get the opportunity to sort of embellish a little bit more on some of the items that may have been raised in the previous meeting. So I always write notes and send them out on email. Not you should do this, but these are some of the things we talked about. But also sometimes, because things have changed between the two meetings, there are other things that come up. So this is why I've had relationships that have gone on for a long time with businesses, because I can work with them over a period of time. There's always something new to talk about, another way of looking at something that potentially will help people.
Yeah.
And generally, my job is about helping people, which is great.
Yeah.
I like helping people.
Well, I think it's very obvious in what you're saying. I was just thinking as you were talking about that. You're very clearly someone who sees this as like a job of helping people, not strictly just businesses. It's being on the same size table as them. It's kind of empathizing with like what they're trying to get out of what they've been doing.
Yeah.
Some businesses that since they were children they might have been involved with,
Yeah.
So something I want to ask, because you touched on it earlier, that sometimes businesses are very subject to the market. They're subject to like the way the world changes. They're subject to news cycles. How difficult is it, or if you've ever encountered this, to kind of go into a situation where like you can tell it's a little bit doomed and it's completely out of both of your hands? Do you ever have a moment like that when you realise there are circumstances going on where it might be a little bit beyond saving?
Sometimes you do get that situation where you've got, it really only happens where people starting almost shouting out for help where they feel there's an emergency occurred.
Yeah.
In other words, it's a bit like people waving the sort of like drowning, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's probably putting it a bit strongly, but it's the fact that once it gets to a certain point, it does get difficult to be able to get back to solid ground effectively.
Yeah.
I always think when we get to a situation like that, it would have been nice if people sort of 6 months before or 12 months before had thought, well, there look to be one or two issues that are prevalent at the moment. Would it be worthwhile talking to somebody else? It doesn't have to be me, but the idea of sitting down with somebody who hasn't got an axe to grind, in other words, it's not family and friends, where they'll often say, whatever you do is brilliant, or alternatively, I wouldn't do that, it's too risky. They're the kind of two ends. You're very lucky if you've got a family member or a friend who can act as a critical friend, who can be a proper sounding board. So if you've got somebody like that, or if you've got somebody, a professional person that you're dealing with, or whatever, it doesn't really matter. It's just the idea of sort of having somebody else take a look at what you're doing.
Yeah.
So from my point of view, as I say, it doesn't really matter people talk to me or don't. I think it's more to do with the fact that I think people ought to talk to other people. You tend to find with larger businesses, sometimes they do employ consultants who will talk to them, or employ coaches who will work with them anyway. So bigger corporates, not some, more than the 250 probably employees, probably the bigger ones, they will. But when you're a small business, you often don't necessarily have the money available to be able to do that. But there is resource, like myself, where I'm paid for by the D2N2 Growth Hub, part funded by that and part funded by Chesterfield Borough Council. So what that means ultimately is that you get support without having to pay for it, which is why I'm quite busy a lot of the time.
It was a 4 months process getting a hold of
for
you
us to
for
get
today.
to have a chat. I know.
Honestly,
we were, yeah. Well, but we got together eventually, so it's all right.
Here we are having a great time. So I guess it's a very basic, perhaps slightly boring question, but something I'm interested in. How did you start in this line of work?
Right.
How did you come into this?
I used to work in financial services.
Okay.
I used to work for a company that was called Equity and Law a long time ago, working in insurance. So I was what used to be called an inspector, which would be that I was a technical salesperson really, who sold life assurance, pensions, investment type products for Equity and Law. Now over the years that changed. At that point when I first started, it was working with became independent financial advisors. It was just changing. The whole thing was changing. As time went on, they grew and they got acquired by other companies, and eventually it became AXA Sun Life. So I was part of AXA Sun Life, and by that point, I was working with people who are only selling AXA Sun Life products. So what that means is, if they're only selling that individual company's products, who potentially is providing them with the equivalent of business support in financial services terms? So what that means is, effectively, I was doing sort of embryonic version of business support with people. I was also responsible for checking the way that people were selling. So I'd sit in sales meetings and things like that. So in other words, they were working with clients. So I'd sit with them and talk with them. So I've actually got experience in sales, which is not as common as you'd think for people who operate in business support. And
really?
That in itself is quite difficult, because of course sales, whether you want to call it sales or not, ultimately is the key thing. People effectively sell to people. It's not the bad version of sales, it's the version where people want to buy something from you. But when they want to buy something from you, you need to think about how it needs to be positioned, and also even in conversation with people, how would you do that? So I think from my perspective, I've benefited quite a lot from that. And then there was an opportunity to eventually, I worked for other people in financial services terms. At one point, I was also a financial advisor, so I've been a financial advisor. But there was an opportunity to work for Business Link came up. And this is some time ago, when there used to be a contract across the whole of the UK. And I joined Business Link and realised I was reasonably good at it.
Okay.
And actually quite liked
That's
it.
a good feeling, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think over the years I've realised it is something that's quite closely, I suppose intimately related to the way I am as a person. So, when you find that kind of job, and most people, hopefully, eventually will find that kind of job where you think that's kind of me. And I'm quite good at it, but I also quite like it. And I'm not ashamed to say I'm quite good at it, because I think I am quite good at it. But I think that that's more to do with the fact that people have said that they quite like what I'm doing, rather than me saying, "Oh yeah, I'm really good."
I guess that's the benefit of working in something that's always like, face to face, one on one. Like you don't do your job alone; it's always with other people.
Yeah.
You kind of have like live, constant, fairly reliable feedback.
Yeah.
On like, am I actually helping out?
Yeah,
and obviously you seem to be.
Yeah, and if I'm feeling particularly,
love doing that.
and if I'm feeling particularly needy, I'll go, "Was that helpful? Did you find that helpful?" So on some days, depending on how I'm feeling. But I think the fact that I've worked with a number of people for quite a long period of time, and the fact that when I do see people, quite often they want to have a bit more of a chat with me, and we will book another meeting and then another meeting and another meeting. It can be great, but I say that's not the requirement when people first start talking to me. It's more let's have a chat, and that's the other thing. I don't really try and position it as a very big time formal meeting, unless it's a larger business and they wanted a formal chat. And I can do it. It doesn't bother me, but I know that my experience shows that generally having quite a nice intimate chat is worthwhile. Let's have a cup of tea, let's have a drink or whatever it happens to be, and then sit down and just talk around things. And it's not really about gathering as much information as possible from businesses. Certainly the first time, it's about gathering what you think is pertinent. And then if you've got the opportunity to have another chat, again, we said already, it's about sort of then gathering further information, embellishing that so that you understand more and more about the business, and you find more and more about it that it might be worthwhile having to think about.
So with your experience in like sales and working as a financial advisor and someone who, a big point of the enjoyment that you seem to have in this job is tangibly, effectively helping people, helping businesses along. Do you find yourself yourself quite empathetic to all levels of the business? I would imagine so. When even if you're speaking to someone who, if you're speaking to a CEO, do you still very much have in mind every tier of the employee, kind of going down that pyramid?
Yes.
Is that something that is on your mind?
I think about the structure of the business overall. I think the reality is that people see things from different levels depending on whereabouts in the business that they are. Yeah. And so to a certain extent, you've got to kind of understand it from their perspective, but also bring in these other things. Ultimately, especially these days, it's very difficult to recruit. So if we're talking about the current times, at the moment, you definitely need to keep your employees on board.
Of course.
Because if you don't keep your employees on board, you might well find it quite difficult to find replacements for them. Because recruitment's a nightmare currently. Across nearly every sector, there are very few sectors that are influenced by this. So the idea that businesses themselves need to, they always really need to work in a way that keeps the clients happy, keeps the employees happy, and keeps the employees coming back, and keeps the clients coming back, and keeps their suppliers happy. So there's all these things to do, and it's easy to say like at a very high level, which is what I'm saying there, because that's really easy to say. But the devil is in the detail. And that's the thing. It's like, what are you trying to do? How are you trying to do it? What way we're doing it? And it's the same for whichever sort of scale of business it is. It's definitely what's changed since last time. Of the things we talked about last time, what did you think really worked for you? Were there elements that you think didn't work quite so well, or you didn't think were a fit? That's fine. And we'll go forward and we'll see what might be worthwhile. It varies a lot, but I find it engaging. There's a lot of work associated with it. The fun part of it, from my point of view, is always talking to people. To be honest, you can probably tell. In fact, I like talking to people.
Or you managed it for 29 minutes now. And it's been engaging. Yeah. If I had a business I needed to save, I'm sure you'd be a joy to have sitting across from me.
I mean, the thing is, it's about all different types of businesses, like we say. So you might be something where you think there's potentially a problem and you need to fix it, or it could be you think, well, I've got to a certain point and I don't seem to be able to get any further. It's almost like I've got like a barrier ahead of me. I can't do that. I want to go off in a different direction. How do I do that? It's different. What do I? Certain customers I'm not doing quite so well with, or I'm being asked to do something differently. Is it useful just to talk to somebody else? And so there's all sorts of really good reasons to have a chat. But yeah, I think, well, like we said earlier, one of the key things is making sure that people want to engage with you. But if they want to have a chat with you, I think part of this as well, and I think I've said this to a number of people, is I think sometimes some of the things I say are, there's a nuance associated with it. Yeah. Some things arguably quite simple. You've got say 25% of your 30% of your business goes through one customer. Well, what happens if that customer disappears?
Exactly.
Well, yes, it's a standard thing. But sometimes things are far more subtle than that.
Yeah.
And so if you've got somebody who's engaged with you, they're going to listen to the subtle things and they're going to go, yeah, I kind of understand what you're trying to say, and then they'll try and think about the way to integrate it. Whereas if you've got somebody who's not properly engaged with you, that subtlety, that's kind of lost.
Yes.
Because they're wanting kind of proof. Prove it.
Is that kind of where you see because the question I wanted to ask you actually, really, and I again, no details, no names, obviously confidentiality is important with what you do. When you talk to like people at high levels of the business, and even though like, despite the business they represent, they want to help and that you care about helping everyone involved with this business, do you ever find that the human element comes into play? Have you ever had like, a business experiences a slight setback, or experiences like a slight wobble or something, while they're having this ongoing relationship with you?
Yes.
Do you ever find someone just kind of like throw the toys out the pram? Have you ever had a relationship with what you do with business completely sour based on just the person you're in contact with?
What, being difficult to talk to, sort of
being
thing?
difficult to talk to, kind of lashing out, maybe putting blame on you?
No, it doesn't tend to happen, but putting blame on me. I mean, sometimes there's sort of like a cast of thousands, and sometimes people come and sometimes people go. So the fact that I've dealt with people for a long period of time, sometimes I'll see a business once and then they won't think they want to speak to me again, and that's partly because they only potentially wanted one thing and they're not prepared to be necessarily open about some of the other things that might be beneficial to them. So
they were looking for some reassurance for one idea, not ideas. Perhaps.
And sometimes people have a one thing that they want, and if they can't get the one thing that they want, then they won't necessarily want to talk to me again. So it doesn't really faze me from that point of view. And I think I've never had somebody get sort of like aggressive or anything like that ever. Never really had anything like that. People sometimes you're like, I did this, I've done this, and I can't really work out what's going on. But one of the things that I bring is, because I'm a sounding board, then I can actually ask them more questions about it and say, well, what does that mean? What do you think that means? What's happened? What's the detail of what's happened? Then how does that fit against the other things that you're trying to do? You set out and you wanted to do this. It's not ended up quite how you wanted it to. Well, let's examine it. Let's take a look at it. Let's see what you can salvage from this, and what does that mean about the way that you're going to go forward with other things. One of the things I often say to people, I'd say it a lot, is you should always do things on purpose. You should do it for a reason. All the stuff you should do it for a reason. You should never get to the point where you have something, I go, well, why do you do it that way? Oh, I don't know, we've always done it that way. That's really bad.
If you can't tell us why you're doing it that way still,
yes,
that's the problem. When you come to something like that, is it about changing that or stopping that?
No, it's more to do with the fact that if it's working well, you wouldn't want to change it. But then if something changes and things don't work quite so well, then you know the reason you did it, and you might want to reverse that and then choose a different way of doing it.
You've got to know all the parts of the engine.
Kind of, yeah.
You've got to know what your car's
what are the moving parts? Yeah, what are they? And this isn't spending ages thinking about your business at all, but it's about this idea about having awareness. Yes. It's almost like sometimes I think people need to be sort of like a spider at the middle of the web. They can hear things, can feel things moving. I know what's going on.
Yeah.
And it's trying to make it so that whatever's done is always done for a reason, and there's a plan behind that. And then if things do change, then you just change the approach. And again, that sounds quite, you just do this and you just do that. You don't, because I know it's not that easy.
Yeah.
But again, if you've got access to levers, if you understand where the control might lie and where things you can change are, then it makes it a lot easier. Whereas if you're kind of relatively oblivious, that's quite hard.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes talking to somebody else and say, it's not necessarily me, but talking to somebody who's not in your business, and letting them help you to see the business in a slightly different light, and perhaps see opportunities that you hadn't picked out, or perhaps see where there are little things that you could tweak to improve stuff.
Do you ever come across a business in your job that feels like a real puzzle box, like something that like you can't quite seem to figure out? Do you ever go somewhere and you're just very perplexed? Like you almost feel a challenge in what you need to do.
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's to do not necessarily what people do. It's more to do with perhaps their marketplace is slightly different.
Yeah.
You know, they might be doing something. They might be doing something that other people are doing, but they're not. They're marketing it to other people, or they might have a very different way of approaching their clients, or their clients might be very, very different, or they might be a very select group that react very differently to other things. And this is one of the reasons why having a detailed conversation with people is important, because then you can identify the way that they're relating to their clients.
Yeah.
You know, how are they talking to them? How do they find new ones currently? Where are these people coming from? You know, it's almost like auditing things. Audit the, you know, the way people are interacting with you. I often say, do you know where all your customers come from? Where do they come from? Were they referred? Did they come from social media? Did they come from your website? Where did they come from? Did they come from shows you went to? But these are all quite useful things, because then you can do quantitative analysis of what you've done. I know it sounds quite grand, quantitative analysis. Crunch the numbers,
Look
does
at
that,
numbers.
Yeah, does that tell you something? Have you learned something from that, or does it not tell you anything?
Yeah.
There's all sorts of like relatively simple stuff, but just helping people to see how things are and how things potentially could be, and again understanding you can tweak something. If you change everything all at once, that's normally a bad thing, because then you don't know what's been positive and what's been negative. So it's often, you know, what can you change?
Yeah.
And how good are you at monitoring those changes?
The way you talk about it almost reminds you of like how a therapist speaks. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Where it's less about, you're never going to go in and see a therapist when, in this instance, you're never going to have an answer. Like you said earlier, there's no crystal ball, there's no grand prize, there's no one correct answer.
No.
Not going to come to you and like have it solved. It's just about finding the right ways to provoke them to look inward.
Yes.
And identify the issues.
Yes.
You know, knowing where the levers are, knowing which plates are spinning, where the moving parts.
And like I said, it's the important thing is how can they integrate some of the things I've said into what they would normally do, rather than them doing something I say, just do that.
Exactly.
It's more like, well, we do things this way. That seems like a good idea for all the reasons he said, which is the reason what I do is when I position something, it's not like this is a good idea. It's more, this might work for you because this, and this, because of what you've said. Therefore, and then that's why they look at it and go, well, actually, that might be something I could integrate into what I'm doing. Well, how could I do that?
Yeah.
How do I do things now? What would that mean if I changed it? So in other words, it's not fully taking everything I've got and then doing it particularly. It's more taking what I've got and going, well, what's my interpretation of that? How do I do it? The important thing for this as well is that ultimately people run their own businesses. They own their own businesses. I don't want to tell people what to do. Why would I want to do that? Why would I think it was a positive thing as well if somebody just did what I told them to do?
Yeah.
I don't think that's a positive thing at all, because effectively to be in charge of a business you need to feel you're in charge of it. Whereas if somebody's just telling you to do something, that's not.
Exactly.
I think that's rather bad.
So much of what you do seems like just like understanding the human element, just kind of understanding human behaviour, how they think, what conclusions they might naturally drift towards.
There is quite a lot of that, but there's also things about the way the market works. In other words, it's understanding customers, isn't it? Because the customer perception is actually really important. Not actually, what you actually do is important, but customer perception is also important. So those two things run alongside. And you would think perception and what you actually do are the same thing. Well, that's not necessarily the case. It's certainly at the point where you're trying to engage somebody's a prospective client as opposed to an actual client. So it's the way they think about what you do and the way you think about the way you promoted yourself.
Yeah.
How can you develop consistency?
Seems like a very cerebral business.
There's an element of it. I think all of it's got all these different little bits and pieces, which to a certain extent, from my point of view, makes it interesting.
Yeah, very holistic. Everything being connected.
Kinda, a little. But as I say, with lots of businesses do things really well, but there's little bits that can be tweaked. Yeah. So it's not about a failure having a chat with somebody. It's actually a positive thing. Because what it does is it helps, like you said, it's a sounding board. It helps you identify little bits and pieces that might make a little bit of a difference, and that little bit of a difference can make a bigger difference over time. One of the things I often say is that a lot of business is a numbers game. So you had 1,000 customers in a year or 100 customers a year. It doesn't matter. Wouldn't it be nice to have 101 customers, 102 customers?
Yeah.
So what would you do to get 101 customers? I mean, if it didn't cost you any money, but you could just change some of the things you did, well, would you do it? Well, it probably would.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at what you do, there's that kind of thing. How can you improve things just that little bit?
Yeah.
And though each of those little improvements you get, again, it's the compound growth thing, isn't it? So you get one extra customer. That's one extra person who might potentially refer you into somebody else. That's one extra customer who might have a series of requirements over a period of time you might sell into.
Yeah.
Depending on the nature of the business you've got, because it does vary a lot. I mean, if you're selling Mars bars, it's not quite the same as selling some form of, I don't know, electronic solution that you need to...
Well, I'm sure if someone was had a business based around just selling Mars bars, I'm sure they could still find some use in a conversation.
Oh, no, yeah, I think they probably could. But it's not... I think the thing is that the nature of the way that people sell and the nature of their customers does make quite a bit of a difference in terms of the way that you'd look at it. Because obviously, if somebody comes in and buys something and then it's another person comes in and buys something, a lot of it then is about the way you promote your location.
Yeah.
Why would people come in? So I often say, well, why choose me? Why should somebody choose you? Why should somebody choose you over going to, say, another corner shop, or why should somebody choose you over another business-to-business outlet?
Yeah.
Why should they?
Yeah. It's almost taking putting yourself in the shoes of the customer and making them think like,
yes.
When addressing these changes, you need to get out of your head, you need to get out of the business.
Yes.
Someone on the street,
Yes.
what are they thinking when they look at
Yes.
this business?
It's one of the terms I often say is it's trying to look at the other end of the telescope. There's a danger of thinking, well, I'm here, I've got this, I've done it. It's almost like you're over to a market stall. You set up your business as a market stall. It doesn't have to be a market stall, obviously, but you set your stuff up on your market stall. It's a bit like, why is nobody coming? Well, they're not coming because they're not looking at it going, wow, that's attractive. They're looking at it going, I can see it.
I haven't heard about this one. Let's give it a pass.
Yeah. Whereas it's a bit like, if you design the way whatever you do looks to be attractive to your customers, then they're more likely to do something. But why should they choose you over somebody else who's in the same sector? So at a very basic level, those kind of things are really important because it helps people understand starting points.
Yeah.
Because people go, marketing, what's that? Well, marketing basically is basically promotion. How do you promote your business?
It's advertising.
Advertising is part of it, yes. It's the whole thing. But people get tied up with it and think, well, no, we should do this, I should do... And, well, actually, starting point, think about your customer, like you say, is to think about your customer and then think, what's important to them? Why would they even give you a second look? Why do you look different to other people? Yeah. Again, that sounds quite simple, but when you think about it in relation to individual businesses, then there's a lot. I don't know. That's one of the reasons I find my job fun. Really, I find it fun because it is trying to help people, and you're trying to work out different ways of doing things. And sometimes certain approaches work better than others. Sometimes they don't work quite so well, but that's fine because you're exploring and you're helping people to move forward. And even if you get something which doesn't work quite so well, what does that tell you? What does that tell you about your customers? What does that tell you about the type of product or service or whatever you've got? What does it tell you? Is that helpful in terms of the next thing you do? Well, it probably is. Yeah. Probably is.
Just to wind down this conversation now, the final question I want to ask you, and something that I've been, and please don't take this personally, I think the last thing I was expecting from someone who works in sort of this field was someone who was like very deeply empathetic and like, I just really want to help people, and this is a way of just coming into like their careers, but finding a way to like help them move along. So his careers could be like instrumental in the lives of, like you said, hundreds,
Yeah, probably.
So what do you find, I think we might have already touched on it several times, I might be asking a question I already know the answer to. What do you find the most fulfilling part of your job?
I think from my point of view is when people say that the things that I've done for them have really been helpful. I think that's it. When I get that kind of feedback, I think it makes me feel like I've actually achieved something. And sometimes they'll do it in conversation, and I really appreciate that, and it's really nice. It makes me feel like I've properly connected to them, and more than that, I've made a difference to them that has had a proper impact on them. Also, when people send me emails saying nice things, I always think that's quite nice. So actually, also like I've got a prize. I've got a prize. Somebody said something nice. It's sometimes the other thing. Sometimes is where somebody does something. They make a little change. Yeah. And that little change leads to more business or leads to an improvement in certain aspects of the business. And you're like, yeah, that was something we talked about, and that did make a difference. And you're saying, that's a really positive thing for me. Yeah, it's a proper manifestation of it. See, a lot of the really small things, you're not necessarily as discernible as something quite chunky. Sure, it'll be an improvement, but it won't be something that's like a massive improvement. But every so often there'll be things where you think, oh look, that's done something really, really good, and I get quite excited about that. But overall, just that sort of feedback about you've helped me and you've made a big difference to the way I run the business. And I always sort of reflect it back and say, well, you might feel I've helped you, but a lot of it is coming from you. I mean, I do bring new things to the table. It's not just a reflection. You show them the light. Sort of. I help them with the direction. Yeah. And sometimes because it's a problem-solving thing, I can find different routes that hasn't been considered before, just as a way of even giving them alternatives, even if they don't choose that route either. I think that can be quite helpful. But yes, it's it's feeling that I've actually made a difference to people, and that they value it, but also that it has had a proper impact on what they're doing.
Yeah, it seems like you found like a very noble way of kind of going about this business. This very like fulfilling, empathetic reason to do what you do.
Yeah, I think it's nice to get up in the morning thinking you're going to do the right sort of thing, that you're trying to help people.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't, it's not so much like vocational calling, but I just sort of found something that I quite like doing. But
you found your way.
Kinda, yeah.
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 I think that's all anyone could really want, isn't it, in a career? In anything.
I think so, yeah. I think it's sometimes quite difficult for people to find what their forte is, and I think a lot of that is it's almost not necessarily people not necessarily being fully aware of what they do actually like and what they don't like, and the things, the activities that they could do during the day that they not.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing, and sometimes that's the hardest part, is being true. It's almost like being true to yourself, but in a work sense.
Yeah.
Which is a really hard thing to do.
Being true to yourself in a very unique way.
Yeah.
In a way people might not have thought about before.
Maybe.
It's been really good talking to you.
No, it's been great.
All right. From myself, Lewis at Kakou, and from Adrian Williamson, goodbye. See you. I'll talk to you next time.